remezo bya Afurika. Uyu ni umugabane ukize ariko ni umugabane urimo abaturage bakeri, ni umugabane ufite ibikorwa remezo bitubatse, kandi usanga uyu mugabane wa Afurika ari wo wubaka ibihugu byinshi by'Uburayi, ibihugu bya Amerika. Ni umugabane ufite amabuye y'agaciro, ni umugabane ukorerwamo ibikorwa binyuranye. Reka dukurikire rero iyi nama.
And claim Africa's place at the decision-making table? Or will the continent be on the menu of global powers in an increasingly Africa CEO a new era of political and corporate leadership focused on improved governance and best-in-class public policies for the continent. A paradigm shift to put AI, tech education and infrastructure at the heart of African policy making. An urgent push to make seamless intra-African trade an operational reality 5 years after the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement entered into force. And a focus on building a world-class African financial industry while seizing the new financing opportunities offered by a world in transition. The time for action is now. Let's shape a new future for Africa. A future that looks like this.
Thanks to the continuing integration success story of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the region has recorded the highest growth in our annual World Economic Output for the 3rd year running.
非洲正成为中国最重要的贸易伙伴，中国将把关键有限领域的制造。
Okay, if you're not invested in the 10 African lions, what are you waiting for? This diverse group of companies, led by Access Holdings, Dangote Industries, OCP, and EcoBank, has made incredible waves in the past year, with investors from around the world crowding in to get exposure to this upside story.
The United States of America has always recognized the potential power of African unity. Today, I am happy to see it become a reality with the addition of the African Union as a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
And why not even like this?
There's nobody that knows the Africans better than me. Great people, the best people, and amazing CEOs, the greatest anywhere in the world.
Okay, maybe that's pushing it a little bit, but definitely like this.
Oh yeah, we see a great future in Africa. I'm happy to announce that after careful consultation on fiscal incentives with the authorities, we are relocating our corporate headquarters to Kigali, effective next year.
Now let's make it reality.
Good morning. Your Excellencies, good morning. Captains championing for a prosperous Africa, good morning. My name is Fifi Peters, and it is truly an honor to be with you here today at the 2024 Africa CEO Forum, essentially the epicenter of business discourse for the next 2 days, just given the fact that it is the largest private sector gathering on the continent of its kind. Now, we have just heard from some really important people who have had some really important and good things, I think, to say about the African continent right now. You heard what the IMF Managing Director had to say. You heard what China's President Xi had to say. You would have even heard what a fellow African who sometimes, in fact more often than not, forgets his roots, Mabwe Elon. I mean, I can call him that as a fellow South African. And you also heard from a president who could soon reenact Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator and live out the classic line and be back. Will certainly make for some interesting times if that does happen. But those individuals had some really important and good things to say about the continent. Why they matter, they're really important, and perhaps they do represent the views of a lot of important people globally. Positive sentiments that perhaps make us think that perhaps the continent has finally arrived at the table and finally does have a seat at that table and a voice that is heard and respected. Or was that just smokes and mirrors? And does Africa remain the pounded yam or the jollof rice or the chakalaka that continues to be passed around? Ladies and gentlemen, essentially for the next 2 days, this is what we are going to be unpacking and digesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing all of your views on the above. Do feel free to support our fellow African who sometimes forgets his roots, whose margins are being squeezed on X, by sharing some of the commentary that does stand out to you here for the next 2 days. Use the hashtag ACF2024, of course. You can also handle me. I'd be happy to hear some of the insights that you do share. But to officially kick off today's program, as is tradition, many of you will not be surprised by the gentleman who will be addressing us right now, certainly no stranger to most of you in the room. He is part of the contributors that helped to give birth to this platform essentially, and that has helped nurture the growth of this forum of at the table or on the menu. He's the CEO, of course, of the Africa CEO Forum, and also the CEO of the Jeune Afrique Media Group. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly help me welcome with a warm applause on stage, Mr. Amir Ben Hamid.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, Mr. President of Rwanda, Mr. President of Sao Tome, Mr. Prime Minister of Sao Tome, sorry, Mr. President of Mozambique, Mr. Prime Minister of Sao Tome, Mr. Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, dear ministers, heads of institutions, dear participants, dear friends, welcome to Kigali, welcome to the Africa CEO Forum. This is our second edition in Rwanda, so let me start by thanking you, Mr. President, for the support and hospitality, and by telling you that we couldn't have chosen considering 7 months ago, President Kagame gave to one of our media, Jeune Afrique, a very interesting interview where he analyzed with a lot of clarity some of the issues affecting Africa. I found it very interesting. I shared it on LinkedIn and I wrote this post, in which, in essence, I was trying to express two things. The first thing is a very sincere admiration for you, Mr. President Kagame, for your leadership and achievements. Rwanda marked the 30th commemoration against the genocide against the Tutsi. And over these last 30 years, on top of having one of the steadiest GDP growth rate in Africa, Rwanda has kept churning out inspiring economic success stories. Rwandair, a high-end tourism industry, an event sector ranked number 3 in Africa, industrial investment from BioNTech, one of the hottest pharma companies in the world. The list is very long, but I was just given 8 minutes for my speech, so I'm going to stop here. But I'm just going to ask you one thing, Mr. President, if you don't mind. It's a personal request. On top of these glowing achievements, I know Rwanda is supporting PSG or sponsoring PSG. So I would like you, please, to give them some advice on how to finally win the Champions League. I'm a fan, and I'm desperate. No, more seriously, A solid governance system, a strong support to private sector investment have made Rwanda a role model for leadership and strategic investments. This is a remarkable performance. This is the essence of the CEO Forum, and I think it deserves a round of applause. And as I said, it couldn't be more aligned with the themes of this edition. At the table or on the menu. I'm sure you have guessed by now that we didn't plan to do a food summit, but the idea behind this title is that over the last two editions, we've had very upbeat conversation about sovereignty, about the numerous opportunities it created for the African private sector. But this year, when we prepared for this edition, we heard a very different tune. We heard a private sector worried about three things. Number one, the unity of the continent. If you look at it thoroughly, 30% of the continent is embroiled in a kind of direct or covert confrontation. The second issue is our attractiveness. 5 years ago, in the same room, not exactly, but in the KCC, we celebrated the inception of the CFTA. And 5 years after this celebration, we have not enough progress, signs of progress on the CFTA. And third issue, our continuing deterioration of macroeconomic finances, with for the first time in 25 years, the increase of poverty on the continent. These issues are threatening to reverse 2 decades of progress. And from these worries was born the theme of the forum. Because for Africa not to land on the menu of global powers, for Africa to secure a place at the table of global negotiation, we radically need to change course. For this to happen, we need transformative agendas. And one agenda in particular, the leadership agenda. And this was the second thing I wanted to express in the LinkedIn post I mentioned earlier. The absolute priority we need to give from now on to governance, leadership, and accountability. Like many of you here, our group is a family business. It was founded by my dad, who was first and foremost a journalist. And I learned a lot of things from my dad's work. It made me curious, and it taught me the value of asking not just questions, but the right questions. And the right question is here, why are we in this situation? Over the last 36 months, 5 countries have gone through a military coup. Numerous numbers have had messy elections. In the last 24 months, a number of economies have had currency crisis, debt default, if not both. This sounds historically familiar. So the right question is, why are we in this situation again? And I think we're in this situation because we often ignore problems of leadership. We often look the other way when governance was meddled with. We overlooked problems of accountability. And we did that because business was good, money was flowing, and it was easier to sweep these issues under the rug rather than addressing them. But you are CEOs, heads of institutions, heads of states, and we all know that's what not leaders do. I'm sure you're familiar with Einstein's quote on insanity. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And I think in this room nobody's crazy, and I think that none of us wants the next 25 years to look like the last 3. So we will need to talk about leadership during this conference. So I'll trust the speakers of the opening panel to set the tone on leadership, because they're undeniably qualified on that issue. Our heads of states panel tomorrow is not to be missed. They will be addressing this issue of leadership, but also the difficult decisions ahead on climate, on technology, on the CFTA, but also on the talent we need to appoint to the Pan-African institutions that represents Africa on the global stage. There are two very important elections in the coming months, the AU and the FDB. We'll hear, speaking about talent and wins, we'll hear the Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire, our next year's host of the forum, who will share with us what it is to organize and win an African Cup of Nations, and who will explain to us how he intends to capitalize on that victory to shape a sports industry in this country, in Côte d'Ivoire, I'm sorry. We'll also speak about the other critical agendas, financing. We'll hear the CEO of Access, of AFG, of AFC, KCB, BK, all the alphabet of financiers trying to fund the ambitions of the continent. We'll talk about integration with the free zone and logistical giants, Arise, AGL, MSC, Maersk, Djibouti Ports, who will explain to us how to bridge the gap on infrastructure and put Africa on the global trade map. And of course, in the era of AI, we'll talk about this, about technology and disruption with AI African leaders. So, in a sense, it's going to be, in the tradition of the forum, a very rich program that hopefully will kickstart these transformative agendas. Before I give the floor to my friend Maktar Diop and RDB CEO Francis Gattari, I would just like to give you, as usual, a few news on the development of the Africa CEO Forum. First, I would like to share with you that the platform that we launched 3 years ago, it was in 2021 in Forum, the Africa Financial Summit, has become, thanks to all of you, the premier event, the #1 event for the Africa financial industry. It's gathering now every year 1,000 participants, among the most important members of the industry, bankers, insurers, telecom operators, fintechs in Africa, and they're all gathering to the next edition will be in Morocco on the 9th and 10th of June, and I invite all the members of the financial community that are here with us today to join us in Casablanca. The second news is related to leadership. I couldn't have stressed enough and how much leadership was important for ourselves, the Africa CEO Forum, not trying to be a change agent. To this program, we plan in a few years to from 400 to 500 young political leaders united by a common agenda, excellence in public policies, and dedication to African integration. I seize this opportunity to welcome and greet the president of the University of Mohamed VI. I encourage you and urge you to visit their two campuses. They're the most impressive campus on Africa. They're doing an excellent job on education, and I thank them for being our partners. Just a few thanks before leaving the floor. I would like to give a big thank you for the IFC through his managing director, Maktar Diop, and his Vice President for Africa, Sergio Pimenta. I would like to thank all of our sponsors whose commitment allow us to raise loud and clear the voice of the private sector. I would like to thank all the teams from the Africa CEO Forum, from Jeune Afrique Media Group, from the Rwanda Development Board who have prepared.
Welcome to Rwanda once again, a country of unparalleled beauty and immense business opportunities. So we are going to be looking forward to do business with you, but we also hope that you will take time to step out of the conference rooms and out of Kigali and enjoy the full hospitality of the Rwandan people. But for your business interests also, I want to invite you to the business to government dialogue we are going to be having this afternoon, where we'll be unfolding the business opportunities in Rwanda, and also to the Invest in Rwanda forum that we are going to have tomorrow afternoon. We want to explain to you the opportunities, the incentives, and the partnerships available. I want to take this moment to thank Amir and to thank Maktar for your partnership and for your trust in Rwanda to host for the second time the Africa CEO Forum. We are looking forward to host you many more times in the future, and we want you not only to do business with us, but also to have fun. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
What has happened?
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Gataria. And next, reference already made to this gentleman, a long-standing partner of the Africa CEO Forum, of course, and a serial champion of private sector-led economic growth. Can kindly welcome Mr. Maktar Diop, the Managing Director of the International Finance Corporation, to address us next. Thank you, sir.
His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of Rwanda, His Excellency Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, His Excellency Dr. Patrick Emery Trovoada, Prime Minister and Head of Government of the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome, and his spouse Nana Toure Trovoada, His Excellency Robert Begre Mambe, Prime Minister of and Chief of Government of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, His Excellency Hugh Alexandre Barrot-Chambrier, Vice Prime Minister of Gabon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again to the 2024 edition of the CEO Forum. First, I would like to thank our gracious host, President Kagame, and the Rwandese people for their warm hospitality and the unwavering commitment to private sector development. I would like also to thank Amin Berhi Ahmed and the team of Jeune Afrique for partnering with us to create this flagship event, the premier Pan-African Forum for promoting and supporting African businesses and economies. I would like also to thank the CEO of the Rwanda Development Board, Mr. Gatere, for his hospitality and for the leadership he has shown in organizing this event. It's with a lot of enthusiasm that I stand before you today to reflect on a remarkable journey. I was lucky to be there in Geneva more than 10 years ago when this initiative was launched. Today is happening in Africa, and we had an opportunity to discuss in Africa the pivotal role of innovation in tackling the challenges faced by African economies. Since then, the pace of change has not only accelerated, but it has been reaching some heights. The question we must now ask is how Africa can seize the opportunities presented by the tech revolution that is reshaping the way we live, we work, and we do business. Artificial intelligence is quickly becoming a mainstream technology, akin in some way to what electricity was a century ago, with the potential to revolutionize the production of goods and services. This is what the economists call the generalized purpose technology. Its applications are vast and varied, from design and economics to education and medicine, and already billions of dollars are being channeled into this exciting sector. 2 days ago, Google, one of the big tech, was having its annual event. They were mentioning hundreds of billions of dollars that will be invested in this sector and how it will be changing the way we are producing goods. The question is where Africa stands in this process. I think there are good things which are happening. I would like to highlight a couple of them to illustrate what I want to say. Here in Rwanda, when you talk about innovation, this country has been adopting technology at a very fast pace. And the best example, and we're honored to be associated with this effort, was the production of mRNA vaccines. And I remember vividly when this challenge was put before African leaders, how people didn't believe that it could happen in this continent. And I'm very proud to see how Rwanda has taken this challenge forward and making a reality. By doing that, this is placing African countries on the global map of vaccine production, and also signals the dawn of a burgeoning biotech industry. I would like to emphasize that the AI part of the BioNTech was developed by an African startup, which was bought after BioNTech. So the knowledge was here in the continent. We are now exploring the next phase. We're talking about genomics. Genomics that leverage the rich biodiversity and genetic resources of the continent, laying the groundwork for precision medicines and the development of treatments tailored to the specific needs of African population and diaspora. This is an example of where Africa is taking its claims in a sector that has long been dominated by other regions. All of us can take immense pride in the collaborative project underway in Rwanda, in Senegal, and the cooperations that produce these striking results. This is what I call African Continental Free Trade Area in action. But the question I want to ask, how to multiply this good example? How we don't make this example not an exception, but the rule? I think that to move in that direction, a few conditions need to be met. First, digitalization. Data is a new gold. I repeat, data is a new gold. Secondly, reform and invest our education systems with a particular emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and that by distributing equally between women and men. It's heartening to see Rwanda hosting a regional institute of mathematics and IT and forging partnership with well-renowned academic institutions. This is an example that needs to be multiplied and repeated across the continent. We need to support also our startups. It's imperative that more funding, especially from domestic private sector, is directed towards this vibrant sector. At IFC, we're trying to do that with our Disruptive Technology Fund, and we are trying to invest in startups that are investing in technology that will make a difference for development. But we need more billionaires in Africa. We need more millionaires in Africa to believe in these startups and invest in it. These startups are still largely funded with resources coming from the Silicon Valley or other part of the world. This is a challenge that the continent has. The fourth element is the dialogue, the leadership. We know that countries have been developing a public-private partnership and dialogue. A lot of discussion are happening in countries, but there are very rare opportunities where the private sector of the continent is meeting the leadership of the continent. If we want to move forward with the African Free Trade Agreement, this fora need to be created because we want to build African supply chain, African value chain. Therefore, I think that the challenge will be to think about organizing this fora where leadership can hear from the private sector, but also private sector hear the constraints that leaders are facing. Fourth, we need to make sure that businesses in Africa can access to the best brain and the best talent on the continent. We need to have free movement of people, free movement of talent. We cannot move in the Free African Agreement if people cannot come and work in the neighboring African countries. When it's easier for them to go and work in another place, another continent, and work on their own continent. And I would like to really praise and thank President Kagame for allowing free visa for African citizens to allow the best brain to come and visit the country. This is the way we will be building the human capital. The resource of Senegal could be here. The resource of Tanzania could be in Mali. The resource of Kenya could be in Cote d'Ivoire. That's the way the continent will be building this center of excellence. Let me tell you another sector besides health that I think is important for Africans to create jobs, to improve the living condition of people, which is agriculture and energy transition. Let me start with energy transition. We are in a situation now over the past decade that Africa has seen a significant increase in the production of renewable energy, being solar, wind, and now green hydrogen. But while we have made commendable strides, financing direct investment and mobilizing a large share of this investment in Africa, there is still much to be done. Today, for example, 600 million people do not have access to electricity in Africa. There is an energy crisis which is hampering competitiveness, digitalization, and economic transformation. In response, the World Bank Group is pushing for having an initiative by 2030 to connect 300 million Africans. This is an ambitious goal that will require a lot of work for all of us in the room. But without it, we cannot talk about the transformation of the continent. But as we're moving in that area, we need to look at what are the constraints. A lot of our utilities are not in a good shape, which limits the ability of the private sector to invest in generation. We don't have enough private sector investment in transmission. We don't have enough private sector investment in distribution. All these are factors which are limiting the ability to invest in the sector, which is so crucial for the development of Africa. But as we are thinking about it, we register consuming the products that are needed to generate renewable energy, or Africa will think as being part of the value chain for the production of these product items which are so important. Africa has a lot of the critical minerals, have copper, have a lot of mining products which are essential to the digital transformation and the renewable energy. How can we work together to make sure that the supply chain, the transformation of it is happening in the continent, and therefore not only electricity is brought to the poorest of this continent, but also we are creating jobs by doing that. I would like to talk about another topic which is close to my heart. And I quote a singer that people liked in Africa, Bob Marley, "A hungry mob is a hungry mob." I'm talking about food. If people are not fed, the country are unstable. Not only is it unstable, but the productivity of people is going down. So today, we are faced in the last 5 years a crisis whereby African countries were suffering of not having fertilizers, of not having wheat, and were depending largely from the rest of the world. And the fluctuation on the world market affected so much the macroeconomic situation of countries. But Africa has arable land, Africa has water, Africa has people. So why the continent cannot produce food at a level which allows us to protect our macroeconomic situation, but also to improve the well-being of people? This is something which is very close to my heart, and I think is at our reach. In that context, I'm glad to have seen recently progress made in the production of fertilizers. IFC's largest investment this year was in the fertilizer sector in Nigeria. We invested also in Morocco in this area, but this is just one input. There are many other inputs which are important and essential to create and have a production of agriculture which is needed for the continent. We need to solve the issue of land. We need to ensure that the small farmers are not excluded for this. We need to ensure that we attract large investors in this sector. Those are those challenges that we are facing and which are here in our hand if we act collectively and we can solve. We cannot go another decade talking about hunger, food security in the continent. This will be our responsibility if it's not solved. In closing, I would like to talk about something which is important that gathers everybody here, which is financing. Where is the money? Looking at the capital market in Africa, we have seen that the capital market is very shallow. And one of the reasons is that there is not enough public offering. And we need to work towards offering to the middle class, the citizens of African countries, an opportunity to hold part of the assets that are in their countries. So we will be calling countries to have more, particularly for the SOEs, to opening the capital of the SOEs to the citizens of their countries. To say the electricity company belongs to you also. Buy shares. If this company doesn't do well, you will not earn money. So they will have an interest in making this company work. And if we extend that approach in all sectors, we will be stopping capital flow, which is affecting our countries. People are putting their money outside because they don't have opportunities to invest locally. So let's make sure that we are creating assets for people to invest in mass in our continent. Secondly, we need to talk about equity. When you talk to investors in the continent, they all tell us we don't have enough equity. We need to do more equity support and reduce the leverage that company has. That's something that IFC will be focusing in the coming years. We intend to double the size of our equity portfolio. That's the way we believe that our initiative of African Champion will be a lasting initiative. Initiative will create a strong class, middle class of African producers who can be part of the world economy and the world market. So, doing that, I think that we'll be able to have the saving of the elite going to less productive activities and go to more productive activities, because they will be finding a very important return and very high return in their investment. So, I will stop by saying this thing. 10 years ago, we had this slogan, Africa can. Today, we cannot repeat that slogan. The slogan should be Africa is. Africa is what? Africa is creating jobs for its youth. Africa is building resilient growth. Africa is fostering a robust private sector free of bureaucratic hurdles. Africa is nurturing a healthier population with longer lifespan and ensuring that women have equal rights and opportunities to engage in productive activities. I will leave you with this quote of President Kagame. Africa's story has been written by others. We need to own our problems and solutions and write our history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Diop. And so I love the point that you made about the fact that not much has changed on the continent in the past 10 years. Africa can, is what we said 10 years ago, and Africa is what we're saying right now. This is not part of my script, but the reason why I love the points is that I have had the opportunity to speak to a lot of you in the past 14 years of covering business on the African continent. And not much has changed in terms of how those conversations have gone. And I've always said to my colleagues that, when these captains and the policymakers talk about the fact that we need to, and we need to do this, and we need to do that, I'm like, they've been needing to for the past 10 years. Why isn't it happening? And so I think that that's a wonderful point that you have made, Mr. Diop, on the fact that we cannot be saying the same thing in the next 10 years, and I hope that that won't be the case. But to pick up on the point that has been made by the speakers, most of the speakers so far, the importance of leadership and accountability and governance in pressing forward to achieve a lot of the targets that we are wanting. I suppose it's also no coincidence that the forum is happening in a country that has shown the fruits of sound leadership and governance and accountability and what they can yield. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, could we all rise as we do welcome a man who many perhaps believe is the epitome of sound leadership and governance and accountability on the African continent right now, His Excellency President Paul Kagame, sir.
Please be seated. Thank you. Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Philippe Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique, Patrice Trovoada, Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Sao Tome and Principe, Robert Megrebembe Mambe, Prime Minister of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, Amir Ben Ahmed, President and founder of the Africa CEO Forum, Makhtar Diop, Managing Director of the International Finance Corporation, Honorable Prime Ministers, Ministers, and senior government officials, Chief Executive Officers and members of the private sector, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very pleased to be with you today for the Africa CEO Forum. First, I wish to welcome you all to Kigali. I hope you will enjoy your stay with us. I also want to thank the organizers, the Jeune Afrique Group, for hosting Africa's iconic business conference here in Rwanda for the second time. Thank you also and the world at large plays a pivotal role in the trajectory of our development. Intersecting crises from the pandemic all the way to climate change have taught us many important lessons. Among them is the need for the public and private sector to work closely together. The urgency to stop doing business as usual is not new. Over the years, what has become clearer is that our common challenges can be solved if we work together. For our continent, it is equally important to build the capacity to respond swiftly and efficiently to any challenge and bounce back. For example, that's why we established the African Continental Free Trade Area. The rationale is that we have the resources, but we need to be able to share them amongst ourselves. Here I also want to add that the more united Africa is, the more productive our engagement with the partners will become. Integration for Africa's business community is an opportunity to grow our markets and become more competitive. Africa does not have to ask for a seat at the table. I want to agree with most of the points made by earlier speakers, and I understand their frustration. We share the same. Today, almost 20% of the world is African. By the year 2050, it will be 25%. Soon enough, the only middle class in the world that will still be growing is Africa's. As this century progresses, Africa will increasingly be one of the world's economic engines. But to become truly prosperous, we have to upgrade our mindsets and aim for quality, then turn into high-tech products and sell back to us. It is not sustainable. It's simple and clear. This will take a lot of time and effort, but Africa can do it. In everything we do, good governance and politics play a very important role. Having the solution is not enough. The willingness to find a middle ground and not let unnecessary levels of bureaucracy get in the way can make things work better and faster. We also need to challenge the status quo across all areas, whether it is in a business, politics, or civil society. Anything that can be done anywhere in this world can also be done in Africa. And why don't we just do that? Once again, thank you all for coming to Kigali. I hope you will enjoy your stay with us and come back again and again. My simple but very important task, therefore, this morning was to welcome you and thank you, and we are happy to work with you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Inama ya Africa Source Forum ikaba imaze gutangizwa ku mugaragaro n'umukuru w'igihugu. Mwabwumvise ubutumwa bwe bw'ingenzi aho yagaragaje yuko ibishoboka ku yindi migabane no ku mugabane wa Afurika nabyo birashoboka. Ari yagiye atanga ingero kuko umugabane wa Afurika ufite byinshi cyane cyane by'umutungo kamere ushobora kubyazwa umusaruro, ari nayo mpamvu yasabye yuko abikorera ndetse n'inzego za leta bakwiye gukorera hamwe kugira ngo babashe kugira icyo bageraho, kubera ko ntabwo byakunda n'ubundi ko hari icyo bageraho ari uko bagomba kuba bari kumwe. Ngubwo rero ubutumwa bw'umukuru w'igihugu, dukomeza gukurikirana gahunda cyangwa se ibijyanye n'ibiganiro birimo kubera.
Or on the menu. We are of it. As you know, that the bone is a delicatessen here in Africa, and many of us enjoy it. But ladies and gentlemen, could we please welcome Mr. Taufik Hamoud. He's the Chief Client Officer and Chair at the Boston Consulting Group, to lead us in this discussion.
Good morning, and thank you, Fifi. Thank you also for raising the pressure on me now. Everybody stayed. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure, a privilege to address you today back on the continent I was born and raised. In February at the Munich Security Conference, I heard U.S. Secretary Blinken say in somewhat undiplomatic terms that in today's international system, you are either at the table or on the menu. Honest, blunt, and therefore maybe a very relevant theme for the forum this week. I want to take you back 1,000 days in time. Maybe the most consequential 1,000 days since the Second World War. 1,000 days ago, the global pandemic had peaked and was receding. The US and Chinese economies were not decoupling. Nobody had heard of ChatGPT. Inflation was low, interest rates were low in the West. Sovereign nations did not invade each other in Europe. And the prospect of a comprehensive peace accord in the Middle East was very real. Wow, that was 1,000 days ago. How much the world has changed. We call it the Great Reset. And it makes the world incredibly complicated to navigate for CEOs and leaders alike. And yet, most of the world's challenges will find their solutions here in Africa. The critical minerals for decarbonization, the energy, the green energy potential, the agriculture, and how to feed the world, the carbon sequestration potential of the Congo Basin, and the 2.5 billion consumers by 2050, and the human capital it represents. That's where the world's solutions are. So this Great Reset is going to impact companies, governments, NGOs alike. And I want to take a few minutes to show you how we think of the world. We call it the 5G world, and how to make sure that you are indeed at the table. Hopefully the clicker works. It does. 5 forces. Let's start with geopolitics. With the Ukraine war, the world woke up from a long geopolitical nap, and all of a sudden, geopolitics have made it to the boardroom. Bismarck famously said, nations have no friends. No friends. They only have strategic interests. And so this fragmentation of the world today represents a unique opportunity for African countries. We have never had so much freedom to choose who we do business with. Sorry, the clicker is going a little bit faster. We'll go back one page. The second force is Gen AI. I just came back from Las Vegas. I was at Google Cloud and OpenAI. Once in a while, you have a technology that comes along that's so powerful that it fundamentally changes the march of human economic progress. I do believe that is what Gen AI is. It's exponential. If the internet was knowledge, Gen AI is expertise and productivity at your fingertips. Mr. Diop, you mentioned it. It can unleash a wave of productivity, and Africa needs productivity, from education to healthcare to logistics to finance. And by the way, it's not just the US and China. Keep an eye on what's happening in countries like the UAE. In my view, the third power today in the world of Gen AI. Their large language model, Falcon, is one of the very best. They had a minister of AI in 2017, 7 years ago. And to the CEOs in the room, don't be skeptical. Regardless of your industry, you are a technology company today, whether you know it or you don't. And so my call to action is upskill on Gen AI. Make sure you do not miss this massive opportunity. Bring the cost of cloud computing down. Invest in data centers. Diversify your partnerships. Which takes us to the third force, green. The green revolution is just starting. Africa has a key role to play. but it has to be on Africa's terms. On climate finance, the bill is going to be immense. Some people talk about $9 trillion a year. John Kerry just said a couple of weeks ago, we just don't have the money. But the money will have to come from somewhere, and private capital is awash in cash around the world today. Pay attention to what's happening with the green industry policies of others, and make sure that the focus on adaptation and resilience is high. On food, you touched on it earlier as well, Mr. Diop. A third of all food produced in Africa is either wasted or lost. The agricultural lands here have an irrigation level of 1.5% compared to 15% in Asia. It's a real pity. This continent, instead of being an agricultural powerhouse, has to import $100 billion worth of food every year. The call to action here is also clear. Fertilizers, but also storage facilities, processing facilities, ports and logistics. And then on energy, and I'll pick again on the same statistic, 600 million Africans lack access to energy today. Just like we did with the mobile miracle, we can leapfrog the energy systems of the past. That means renewables, mini grids, small and medium nuclear reactors. Yes, we also need gas, maybe oil, but let's make sure we don't end up with stranded assets. Fourth, global debt. This is important. Over the last few decades, the levels of public debt have been rising all over the world. The pandemic turbocharged that. There's not a lot of money in public coffers around the world, but there is a lot of money in private coffers. And Africa's priorities are going to be incredibly capital intensive. So our ability to mobilize public and private capital will be important. I talk to investors around the world. Here's what they tell me. We want a few years of macro stability before we will consider a large project commitment. We want to see a pipeline of bankable projects, less forex volatility, more liquidity on the capital markets. They want to see the conditions for a good return, but the money is there, whether it's sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, large family offices, big corporates. Another thing that's close to my heart is the reset of the debt and credit multilateral system. It was designed many decades ago and for a particular purpose. It is actually astonishing to think that Africa, with the youngest population and the most upside on growth, is the one that is the most constrained on the ability to run deficits and debt to fund its development. Something to think really carefully about as we renegotiate some of these multilateral agreements. And then the final force, which makes you really optimistic and quite excited about the future, is Generation Alpha. Those who were born after 2010. It makes us all pretty old. In 5 years, not that far, 50% of all Africans will be Generation Alpha. Put it in a different way, a third of all Generation Alpha in the world will reside in Africa. This is an amazing demographic dividend, one that we should not waste, one that cannot be neglected. I talked earlier about how Africa has a massive capital shortage. It also has a massive labor surplus. So the call to action is, first and foremost, education, education, education. Use AI to leapfrog. Someone mentioned earlier Morocco. I do agree. It's incredible what has been done with the university there. Arguably now one of the best universities, if not the best, in Africa in less than 10 years. So good, actually, the digital skills there, that we, BCG, have decided to delocalize one of our biggest global AI hubs in Morocco. The decision will be made public shortly. Then women. So important to unleash the power of women on this continent. The entrepreneurial power. We all know that African women are entrepreneurs at 5x European women. But corporates have a big role to play here, to break the glass ceiling and to make sure that the mindsets and the social norms are changing. And finally, on this Generation Alpha, let's also unleash the youth creative industries. whether it's culture, sports, music, arts, fashion. Africa has so much to export. This is our soft power. This Generation Alpha is our soft power. We can do more. So, I'm going to close a few final words, if you allow me, on this 5G world. The time is now to take advantage of a unique moment. And if there's anything I wanted to leave you with, actually today, is two convictions that I hold very firm. The first one is we're in the midst of a great geopolitical and macroeconomic reset, one we have not seen in generations, and one that will have profound historical and economic implications. Two, that there is this unique window of time for Africa, one where, honestly, a bold course of action is the safe course of action. And of course, there are naysayers. I hear them in Paris, in London, in New York, in Shanghai. Africa rising has been a theme for a long time. Africa needs more reforms, deregulation, regional integration, governance, less political turmoil. It's so hard to make money in Africa. I hear this. It's true, somewhat true. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to share my real conviction that we're so close to the moment where Africa achieves what I call escape velocity. 12 of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world this year will be in Africa. There's so much happening in this continent that is positive that people don't really see or know of. We just need to multiply and amplify all these sparks. The concept of escape velocity is a very powerful one, of course in physics, but also in the human mind. Because once you achieve escape velocity, there is no going back. So you, as leaders, have a great role to play to set a bold course of action. I wish you a good forum. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for that presentation, Taufik. So from one set of 5Gs to welcome another set of 5Gs on the stage, who will intent of the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa. Aigboje Aig Imokwere, the Chairman of Access Holdings. Ralph Mupita, MTN Group President and CEO. And last but not least, Mr. Sergio Pimente, the Vice President for Africa at the IFC. Greetings to you all. Minister, we have been crossing paths a lot lately. We were together in January at the World Economic Forum. I was with you just the other day at the African Union meetings, I think it is. And so I want to reflect and start this question with you, ma'am, because in my view, 2023 was a relatively significant year for the African story and the discourse and where we do sit in the global standing. You'll remember that in 2023, in August, South Africa hosted the BRICS conference. An announcement was made of expansion in which I believe the grouping invited 5 other countries, 6 initially, 5 accepted, and we have gained more neighbors from the African continent in the BRICS. We also recently, in November, I believe, had the African Union finally gain its place as the 21st member amongst the other big Gs. Notwithstanding the louder voice that a lot of African policymakers and business grew when it did come to matters of geopolitical standing, a divergent voice in certain matters of war from the global north, notwithstanding some of the risks to economies and maybe political relations. Significant events, in my view, ma'am. In your view, though, has anything changed in terms of Africa's standing at the table, or are we on the menu?
Thank you, Fifi. And welcome to Kigali. I heard it's your first time and not the last, I hope.
Thank you.
So before we discuss even if it's a good news or bad news, let's just remember that what has been repeatedly said this morning, we are a population of 1.4 billion people. And wasn't it high time we join, or the G20 welcomes us as African Union to the group? But we still are one voice among 20, as we represent 20% of the world population. So just put things into perspective. And what has also been said this morning, and I hope you hear it again and again so that we ponder upon that fact, we are the fast growing middle class and population in the world. So the potential for growth there is remarkable. I agree with what has been also said. The discourse is changing. And to the fact that you just highlighted, yes, the African Union has joined the G20, so there is a chance that our voice is heard. But maybe I feel it's also high time we reframe some questions. Fine, we are at that table. Is it a point of celebration that finally this year or last year we joined that table? How influential will our voice be if we don't stand together and have one voice? That's for one. And second, as we convene in Kigali, and I would agree with Maktar, 10 years ago I was in Geneva at the Africa CEO Forum. Also good news, we are invited at the table with the powers that be. Isn't that also high time we set our own tables and invite our friends and partners to eat?
Okay. Okay.
So it's an invitation for us, yes, celebrate. You are invited at a place where you are one voice against 20 others, however you represent 20% of the world population. It is good to have a seat, but how influential is your voice if you don't come as one voice? And last but not least, look at the convening power of our continent, let alone the convening power of the CEO Forum today. Can't we not host our own events of such a scale? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Tassa, how do you see things?
In fact, when we look back 10 years, some may believe that nothing has changed. But if we travel, as I did extensively in Africa, and meet the captain of industries, the youth, the women working on the ground, we see a tremendous change in Africa. And that creates hope for the future and for the voice of Africa to be heard and for Africa to have the right place on the right table. So let us take 3 examples. The first example is the new generation, the Alpha generation. So if we look at what is going on today in Africa, we realize that the young generation is totally different from all previous generations. And today, as we talk about the global South and global North, we can talk about the global youth. That's a new reality. There is a global youth. Because today, a kid in Kigali is playing with a kid in Kinshasa, a kid in Cairo, or in Cape Town. Today, the youth are tech-savvy, and they are really very innovative. And I was amazed meeting some of the startups, the tech startups in Africa, and seeing how they have been able, during COVID, to develop very innovative solutions, not only for the health sector, but also for trade, making the Continental Free Trade Agreement potentially a reality. The second example is about agricultural value chain. And the Excellency the President has made it clear that we need to transform our product on our continent. And today, if we look at the role played by some pioneers, the captain of industries, but also some financial institutions, African financial institutions, we see the development of specialized economic zone, to transform, to process our product in Africa and add value and create jobs for youth. The third area is the women's ability to develop the business, particularly through micro, small, and medium enterprise. And as you know, SMEs represent more than 90% of the economic tissue in Africa. Most of them are out of the formal sector. But today, they are not only targeting their local market, but sometimes even considering an African and a global market. And digital solution to make microfinance at their disposal are really increasing their power and their capacity to develop their business.
Sure. It's probably an irony that we are having this conversation amongst ourselves at a table. Table of the future, maybe one invented by AI. Nonetheless, we are at the table. And then the same question to you, Mr. Imokweda, then goes. Your take on the change globally, the resetting of all these relationships that we have been reporting as members of the media, those of you who are keen watchers of CNBC Africa, I hope that you are. You would have heard that coverage. Has anything changed in your view in terms of our standing?
I think it's interesting that, this year we celebrate 140 years of the Berlin Conference. That was probably the first table where Africa was thoroughly discussed.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we were at the breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the time. But things have moved significantly. First of all, there's no longer one table, in the sense that if you think finance, you might say the IMF, the World Bank, you think about geopolitics, you think about the UN, G20, you think about health, you talk about the WHO, and we can go on and on. And the fact that today, whether as chefs or as organizers of tables, Africa's beginning to play a role as CEOs of some of these organizations and so on. Certainly, the argument about whether we have a seat is answered in the affirmative. The question, of course, is that is the seat as high as the seat of others? Are we sitting on seats or are we sitting on stools? And when we come to the table, does the substance of our invitation and the substance of what we bring to the table give us the type of voice that is listened to and carries a lot of weight? I'll just give you a simple example. With climate change and the energy transition and the arguments and issues around the energy transition, Africa had the loudest voice around the issue of just transition. And to be honest, our voices were loud, clear, very articulate, but did not carry much weight. And it's very interesting that, just 3 years ago, when big oil started to pivot and took decisions to slow down the cuts on energy, the world rewarded them with higher prices, share prices, and, of course, as we know, right now, it's no longer that popular to speak about slowing down it's no longer that unpopular, rather, to speak about slowing down the energy transition process. So my view is that there is still a long way to go, but I like to think about us having our own tables. And I think we should learn from what Asia has done very effectively. And by ensuring that your common markets, that which you have, look at our population, 1.2 billion Africans, look at our youth demographic. If we position these things in our favor, the tables that we command could become very influential. Indeed, actually, as far as I'm concerned, the youth table for the future of the world is Africa's.
Strong point there. Reiterating the point of Mr. Tade on the global youth phrase that we need to speak more pronouncedly about. Ralph, is it a stool? Is it a chair? Is it chagalaka? Is it yam? How do you see things?
I just wanted to pivot off the point that Ike raised, which I think is a really fundamental point. This whole discourse around the tables, I think it's important that we start thinking about the African table. As we think about those 5 Gs that were shared earlier on, just to touch on 2, maybe 3, I think when you think about the geopolitics and say what is behind what we're seeing the last 1,000 days, it can be one of two things. One is just sheer power, demonstrating sheer power, or economic interest. And if you start thinking about the economic interest has to be about the future. And what Makta Diop said really around Gen AI, we on this continent should be really seized with the direction of generative artificial intelligence, the ability for systems, computers, to be able to process new content to drive productivity. And when you think about what's happening there is enormous amount of investment, the languages that are being ingested in those models, very few African languages. So if you think that this is a vehicle for transformation, for a transformation as important as electricity, I think if we don't organize ourselves as African very quickly, we could be left behind. We could be left behind because you don't have those productivity tools for the bulk of the people of that continent. And hence coming back to Ike's point, which is, let's start with our own table on the geopolitics side. So if you come to the point around the global debt situation and how it affects us as Africans, the point was also made that the needs for Africa are very capital intensive. And we need, as we sit on our own table, to talk about how are we going to build the necessary infrastructure. Just digital infrastructure requires $100 billion on the African continent to ensure that everybody has access to broadband. We don't have that yet. And that's an agenda which we should have on our African table. And the final one, which is this Gen Alpha point, which is the future. The future of this world in terms of the big consumers 30, 40, 50 years out absolutely is Africa. Why do we see US companies, Chinese companies and the like building subsea cable all around Africa? It's because that's the future, preparing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we have to, as we are using this forum and the platform of Africa CEO Forum, to really think about our table, because once we are aligned, once we align around 2063 vision, I think we will be a lot more powerful, more influential around the global dynamics. So the table I really vote for is our own table, where the stools are the same height, you're not sitting on a differentially level stool, and we shape the agenda during this great reset that we're all experiencing right now. And that would be my contribution to the question.
Okay, fantastic. Sergio, final thoughts from you just in terms of the opening remarks and the standing, and I think that your perspective will be an interesting one as well, looking at the continent from the outside and notwithstanding the work that the IFC does within Africa. I mean, we have heard about, what change and impact really does one voice or two voices in 20 make. We've heard about the fact that, are we a stool, are we a chair? We've heard about the fact that we shouldn't even be aspiring to go to the existing table. We should create our own. Your thoughts, given everything that has been happening in the recent while on Africa's standing in matters of global discourse?
Thank you very much, Fifi, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I think a lot has been said about this table, and I'm trying to kind of visualize. And I think in a world of technology, we have to think about there's no more one table. There's all kinds of furniture floating around, and I'm sure artificial intelligence will create furniture that we will not even recognize.
Sure.
But what I see in Africa, I really see that Africa is, compared to 10 years ago, compared with the first CEO forum that I went and what I've been doing over these last years, I see that Africa is changing the way it's looking at the issues. And it's looking at solutions in Africa. So it's no more a continent of opportunity, it's a continent of solutions. And I see African companies, I see African leaders really every day looking at how can I contribute to find a solution to the problems that we talked about. Because there's always a debate. I mean, we're talking about tables, before we talked about glasses, half full, half empty, what we put on the table. But there are challenges. Of course there are challenges, we all know them. but the solutions, I think, are bigger than the challenges today. And I see that happening. I see a lot that can the technology bring. I think it was mentioned a number of times this morning. And when I look at technology, I also looked at, some of the challenges that Africa had. We talk about informality, we talk about SMEs, how we reach them. With technology, you can bring them in. You can bring them at the table. So I think that's one of the aspects that we can really think about. The other aspect that was mentioned several times about the youth, in particular women, how you bring them to the economic table. I think all this is working in the right direction. So at the IFC, what we see, because I think that was your question, Fifi, is that we see a very strong evolution of also the type of investments that we are doing and the type of companies that we are helping. Today, the large majority of our clients are African companies that are investing on the continent, in their own country, but also across the continent. And what is interesting is that they're also going outside of their, I would say, comfort zone of the neighboring countries. You see companies from Kenya asking us about, can I invest in Nigeria, can I invest in Cote d'Ivoire, can I invest in different parts of the continent? And we do really see this crisscrossing of investment, not just on trade, I'm talking about investment, that is really, really happening. So we have been accompanying that movement. We have also had to change our business model because our clients are different. They are sitting in different places across the continent. So we've opened a large number of offices. We have now 35 offices across the continent, and very soon, in July 1st, we'll have 39. So we have a presence on the ground. We've increased the volume of our investments. We used to do about $3 billion every year.
Sure.
We passed the $10 billion bar last year, and we were at 11, and I think we're going to be higher this year. Our managing director is pushing us to go even higher than that, so I'm sure we will get there. But what is interesting is that these investments this year will be in 41 countries. So we're really trying to spread, because with technology, that's what I really find is very interesting. You can see that growth, that opportunity, that solutions can come from everywhere in the continent.
Okay.
From where sometimes we don't expect it. And so that's very important to be able to support all of that.
Okay. So just if we pick up then on the theme that has been raised, and I like it, it's really nice. You make reference to what Asia has done. I imagine you were talking specifically about China in terms of creating its own table, repeated by yourself, Ralph. And okay, so if we move with this analogy that the continent can build its own table, we don't necessarily have to sit at what's already there. I'm coming back to you, Sergio, in terms of asking what the short-term implications of this could be on financing. Already we have heard that we have a lot of opportunity, and a lot of that opportunity will take a lot of money to realize. Short-term, medium-term implications, if any, of us creating our own table. I think it was just yesterday where the Biden administration administered further sanctions against a status quo. There are ramifications. Significant implications of money that will be coming into the continent as a result of that. Perhaps another way to put it, will it increase or lower the risk premium?
Well, I think the world is changing globally. Whether we decide in Africa to do that course or to do another course, the world will still continue changing. So what I see in Africa is that if we are going and developing our own financial instruments, if we are going and tap into the capital markets, help them develop, make them deeper, and we take a route that is more African focused, I think we'll just be adding value. We'll just be adding a route that contains a lot of promise. So this will also create more certainty. You are talking about sort of the level of risk premium and so on. I think this will actually create a direction that will alleviate the problem rather than anything else. So I'm not worried about the short term on this type of direction. I think on the long term the impact will be very positive, and on the short term I think we can really manage it.
Sure. I do appreciate the longer term vision, because ultimately it's the proverbial promised land that we're trying to aspire to. But I also would like to appreciate maybe some of the short-term pain that might be involved in getting there. And we heard from Mr. Diop earlier around, or the call for domestic lenders to step in a lot more than is presently the case. I heard that the IFC is looking to do a lot more, but we need a lot more domestic capital. With that said, We have seen a de-risking from the continent, particularly since the financial crisis of 2008, where many of the big banks have pulled out. And I would have liked to know whether you reckon this is an opportunity for local lenders, or does it present a greater challenge for you to step in and fund more?
I think President Kagame laid very excellent and strong foundations for this part of our discussion. First of all, you do know that when you say the big banks are pulling out, you're referring to the international banks, because in Africa we also have big banks.
All right. Okay, right. Got you, sir. My bad. My bad.
And so some African big banks are buying as the international banks are exiting. For instance, Access Bank is doing so. But the key thing to note, and I harp on the Asian experience. The Asian tigers, China, India subsequently, learned around about the 80s and 90s the importance of having very strong domestic financial systems, okay? And what they did was they mobilized from within their own economies huge savings into Asian financial institutions. So Asian pension funds, Asian banks, and so on, okay? And this money was in turn used to finance development within their countries, okay? In our case, we have situations where huge financial resources are saved by Africans in foreign financial institutions, in foreign markets. And the irony is that when we want to borrow, we seek, investments and credit from the international markets funded by these international banks, okay? And then they charge you a premium on your own money. It's incongruous, right? So again, it comes to the issue of what's the table. And when I said that President Kagame laid a great foundation, it requires the private and public sector to come together and say, let us create a powerful African common financial system. We're not saying others cannot play. We're saying this table must be ours. Because if we don't control the table, we're going to have to eat whatever is served to us, if you get my point. And if I think further, along that line, I mean, look, if you, as an African borrower, is going to the Eurobond market, okay, you've got to, learn how to, basically be dictated to by the European, if you like, financial system. If you create your Afro bond market, okay, then the financing conditions and so on could probably more reflect our own needs and our own, priorities. Now, I'm not in any way saying that the fundamental principles of finance will not come to play in our markets just like you have in every other market. And I'm not saying that our standards and our principles would be necessarily any different. But the truth of the fact is that nuances, perceptions count a lot.
They do. And so it's a lovely audience that's full of claps. I absolutely love it. They do. And that's why we also have seen important institutions on the continent trying to ensure that the perceptions of the continent are more accurate. I mean, I do know that the African Union is moving closer and closer to the establishment of its own ratings agency, and the idea of perhaps even a single currency on the continent, something very far away, but something that is in the pipeline. In the interim, though, Mr. Ta, we have heard about the importance of small businesses also on the continent. And I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are in this room, and businesses who might be small, who might be at medium scale right now, but who can certainly need or who can certainly do with funding to even grow further and make a bigger impact than they presently are right now. Perhaps a more direct message to them, sir, in terms of how DFI's finance, but more importantly, how to make their projects a lot more bankable. Projects in the pipeline, fine. Appealing to institutions such as yours.
So, in fact, if we look at the landscape of the financial system in Africa, we realize that over the past few years, we realized a big transformation in the landscape with bank opening branches in various countries. So we have transcontinental banks, but also the African DFIs have played a pivotal role in developing new solutions. And for instance, if we look at the Pan-African payment system, which has been developed by Afreximbank, it is creating a lot of opportunities for trade among African countries. And also some facilities like the facility developed by AFC to help those who have projects to develop their project and to make them bankable. So the African DFIs are playing a pivotal role and they are working together. And I am happy that recently during the AU summit, the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions has been launched. And this alliance is going to play a pivotal role in helping the business community in Africa to develop their project and to take advantage and to reap the benefit of what the continent has in terms of power potential, in terms of agriculture, food production, in terms of value chain in the mineral sector and the extractive industry in general, but more importantly, developing the talent of African youth.
Sure.
Because African youth is the future of the continent.
Sure. Fantastic. Ralph, to the point that you made about the new technologies and innovations that we're seeing around the world, the point that you made about, and that has been made by other speakers as well, we just need to make sure that we're not being left behind. You dropped a big figure about the amount of investments that will be required in digital infrastructure alone, $100. Do we have the conducive environment then for players such as yourselves and perhaps even international partners to invest in the African continent right now to ensure that we'll also be able to? We're going to take a tea break right now. When we return, we'll be meeting in the Kigali Convention Center. All of the action will be taking place there with the program as it happens live. Do make sure to download the app of the Africa CEO Forum, ACF for 2024. I think you should be able to find it on any of your downloading platforms. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you and see you soon.